Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Wellbeing break for communications and media professionals, brought to you by PRHK and Telum Media. We have a lot to get through over the next hour, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into 4 guidelines that we're sharing for our practice today. First, I want to ask everyone to try and be present for the next hour. We know that you likely have a long to-do list to get done before the weekend. We're competing with your email and your phone notifications. But science has actually shown that focusing on one task at a time, so this webinar for the next hour, for example, helps you feel more focused, more creative, more productive, and it actually helps your mental health. So we ask for you to be present today, not just for our sake, for the speakers, but for all of you to get the most out of today's session. Secondly, please ask questions throughout. You'll see a Q&A button where you can submit your questions, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. Third, we hope that you can take what you've learned today and apply it in your life outside of this hour. You'll be leaving with some ideas and some tools to help your well-being and mental health, but there's a reason why we're calling this a practice. We hope that your time and learning from today goes beyond just this hour. Lastly, please share what you've learned with your colleagues, your managers, your friends, your family, maybe a stranger. Take 1 or 2 things that you've learned and pass it on. Even though this pandemic is a really terrible time for many reasons, it's also been really beautiful in the ways that we've been able to reach out and care for one another. So don't be afraid to pass on what you've learned, and also feel free to share on LinkedIn or your social media channels as well. So who am I and why am I here today? My name is Erica Stein, and I'm a Senior Communications Specialist with Aon, and I'm also a Young Professional Representative on the PRHK board. I've always been passionate about how communications can be used to help people live healthier and happier lives. This began with my career at Ogilvy, Washington, in the States, where I worked with our social change practice before I moved to Edelman in Hong Kong. At Edelman, I worked with our healthcare team, but I also got to launch our internal mental health and well-being initiative. Since then, I've moved to Aon, and I currently work on our well-being solutions team. Our team helps our clients build, execute, and measure well-being strategies and programs for their employees. I'm extremely grateful to be moderating this session today, to have all of you on the line, and even more grateful to have the opportunity to be joined alongside our amazing lineup of speakers. So Kiri, Victor, Abby, and Carol, thank you for joining us today. If you want to give a wave to everyone online. I'll be sharing their bios as we go on, but thank you again all for being here, both from the panel perspective, but also all of you attending today. Before we go into our panel, I at least wanted to start out with kind of 4 definitions or clarifications around 2 words that you're hearing a lot of today: well-being and mental health. While some of this might feel like common sense or might be things you've heard before, I think it's actually quite important because it allows us to have a shared language in our conversation today. And I also hope that by learning these new types of definitions, it can help you think differently about your own well-being and mental health. So the first concept that I wanted to share is that well-being is multidimensional. So this is a term for different people, different things, different organizations. But what you see on the screen is Aon's model of well-being, which we talk about having 4 pillars: emotional, physical, financial, and social well-being. So you see that this is a little bit different from Bridges' dimensions of well-being, which Abby will talk through later. But regardless of what they are, the thing that's most important is how multifaceted well-being is. And by understanding this provides a way that we can think about our well-being in a more comprehensive way. And this is exactly the type of exercise that Abby's going to walk us through later. So the second concept that I wanted to share is that everyone has mental health. Yes, everybody. So mental health is defined by the World Health Organization as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. So this is different from mental illness. Mental illness includes a range of problems that are characterized by different symptoms and is often clinically diagnosed, such as generalized anxiety disorder, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, etc. But it's not just black and white. The third point that I wanted to share is that mental health is a spectrum. To help expand our understanding of what mental health means, it's important to look at this more holistically. So on the right side of the diagram, you'll see mental illness. But as you move towards the left into the green zone, you'll go from mentally ill to poor mental health to reacting to healthy coping. So this is quite important to understand because while we might not be diagnosed with a clinical mental illness, we could still be experiencing mental health problems or mental ill health. And I don't know about you all, but for me, I would say I've probably spent most of the last 3 months or so somewhere between the yellow and the orange zone, with some days on the green when I get to go escape into the mountains and go hiking. So that being said, no matter where you might fall on this spectrum, 2 things are quite important. One, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel or experience whatever you're feeling, no matter where you might fall. And then also, secondly, it's okay to ask for help. I think there's a common misconception that you need to be in the red zone in order to seek help and seek support, but in reality, no matter what we're going through, we all deserve the help and support that we might need. It just might look a little bit different depending on where we fall in this line. So the last point that I wanted to share is that it goes beyond ourselves. Our mental health and well-being aren't just results of our biology, our chemistry, our physiology, our brain chemistry. And this is quite important because it allows us to have maybe a bit more self-compassion than we typically do when we understand all of the variables that are influencing our health every day. So what you see on the screen is called a health determinant model. And this is often used to bring together all of the factors that influences health risk and health outcomes, like where we work, where we live, basic things like water and food, as well as healthcare services and housing. And so thinking about this more holistically, it not only provides us an opportunity to give us more self-compassion, but then also understand how all of these factors work together. And in a city like Hong Kong, where 40% of people believe that having a mental health problem means a person lacks self-discipline or willpower, and this is research done by Mind, this further underscores the need to kind of step outside of ourselves and our understanding of ourselves and how all of these factors influence one another in predicting our health. Which very neatly brings me to COVID. So today's pandemic is uncharted territory for all of us. It's thrown a breadth of new challenges our way and probably exacerbated existing ones. Needs, as you all know, are changing week to week as the situation evolves, whether it's altered work routines or what's on our to-do list, changing family situations, physical and social distancing, financial stress, caregiving responsibilities, the list goes on. And while these impacts are still ongoing and being measured as we speak, I wanted to share a few pieces of research that help quantify this so far. First, an HKU study from March found that slightly over 40% of respondents were suffering from symptoms from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. And a survey done by the Hook Yao Club found that over 20% of students polled in March said that their stress levels were 10 out of 10. And of course, because this is a media and communications webinar, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the increased reliance on our mobile devices, technology, and increased media consumption as well. And obviously there's fallout impacts from that, such as screen time's impacts on our sleep, other things that we're coping like with the pandemic being an infodemic. But all of that being said, it's not all bleak news. The pandemic has also provided an opportunity to pay more attention to our health and our well-being, the health and well-being of others, and team up to create meaningful change, which is exactly what we're doing today. So with all of that being said, I'd like to now introduce our esteemed speakers for today's webinar. First, I'd like to welcome Carol Liang, the Communications Manager at Mind Hong Kong. Hi, Carol. She's the Communications Strategy Lead, and she also leads anti-stigma and health promotion campaigns, digital content, and media relations for Mind, with the goal of raising awareness of and destigmatizing mental health in Hong Kong and beyond. Carol has previously supported a number of public health and development communications programs for the UN, health-focused NGOs, and digital health startups in Boston, New York, and Geneva. Thanks for joining us, Carol. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Kiri Sinclair. Kiri is the founder and CEO of the integrated communications agency Sinclair. She's on the board of both the Marketing Society and PRHK and is an active member of AMAC. She's a strong advocate for the value of PR-led integrated communications in Greater China and across the APAC region. In 2018, she was named the PR Agency Head of the Year at Campaign Asia's PR Awards and the Agency Leader of the Year at the Mumbrella Asia Awards. I'll also add the first time Kiri and I met was actually at an event around mental health in our industry hosted by the Marketing Society last January, so a little over a year ago. So happy that we can continue this conversation today. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Victor Ting, news reporter from the South China Morning Post. Victor joined SCMP in 2019 on the Hong Kong news desk. He covers a broad range of issues with a particular interest in health, welfare, and social affairs. He's previously worked as a broadcast journalist at TVB Pearl and as a feature writer at The Standard. So thank you for being here today, Victor. Thank you, Kiri and Carol. And I will also introduce Abby later on when we jump into our well-being practice. So for today's panel discussion, I wanted to start with a slightly unconventional question, conventional but not unconventional. I wanted to first ask, how okay are the three of you today? So it may seem like a silly question to start off a webinar, but in a largely virtual environment, it's quite easy to jump right into our agenda without a natural chance to check in with one another, as we would if we were in the office. I'd also like to note that the way that we're framing this question is based on Mind's How Okay Are You campaign that they launched last year around World Mental Health Day, which was also supported by Sinclair. And while our team here kicks off our panel and is answering, I'd also like to ask the same question to all of you listening in. How okay are you? You'll have seen the poll pop up, so please go ahead and answer there. It's all anonymous, and we'll leave this up throughout our panel so you can take the time to think about the question and answer. But all of that being said, Kiri, do you want to go ahead and kick us off, and then maybe Victor and Carol can check in with how they're doing right after that?
Thanks, Erica, and it's great to see so many people joining us today. I think that mental health is something that's not often spoken about, and so starting with the question, how okay are you, is a great way to launch a discussion and get a bit personal and uncomfortable in this panel, which I'm sure all of us are ready to do. I think so far today, I've been from 1 to 5 and back to about 3. I woke up anxious. I'm not sure why, mostly probably to do with lack of sleep. I was also on a panel last night that ended at 10:30. So, you know, the adrenaline come down and then getting to sleep. But I think that on a daily basis, I have to take it moment by moment. There are some moments in the day where I think, I've got this, I know what I'm doing, I know what I need to do next. And then there's other moments of the day where I'm just curled up in the corner stroking a cat going, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay. And in those moments, I need to call a friend or reach out to someone for a chat. You know, we're all sitting at home on our own in our own bubbles. And I think sometimes that makes it harder to even check in with ourselves. So I have to remember to do that. And that cats aren't always the best way to check in. But yeah, I think that's a summary of how I am today. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Yeah, Victor, what about yourself? How okay are you today? Well, Victor, I think you're muted.
Obviously, I echo what Kiri said about having different moments on a particular day. And I would say waking up and perhaps preparing yourself to work, and that won't usually start at a very high point unless you already know that you have something very exciting to do. But gradually you just get into it, and then you get more ready for the day, and then it will just goes between 2 to 4 for me. And so and of course it will also be impacted by perhaps what's been happening around Hong Kong every day, because I'm a news reporter covering Hong Kong. So I guess these are the range for my emotions.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, and Carol, what about yourself?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Erica, for organizing all this. I echo exactly what Carrie says, and I pet my dog a lot to check in, so I understand the animal de-stress method. But I think if you go back to that spectrum idea that you were talking about, I guess today would have been more about being in that reactive stage, not exactly poor mental health, but I was feeling a bit overwhelmed and anxious this morning. But I think it was the idea that it's Friday and I feel like it should be Wednesday. You know, you still have that full to-do list, only have the one day. But I actually went for an hour-long walk this morning and it really helped. So I'm feeling better.
Well, thank you guys for sharing and helping role model that. And I think, you know, the more open conversations we can have about how we're doing, I think that's one of the only ways that we can really help look out for one another at this time. So thank you all for being open about how you're doing this morning. So I guess into the hard-hitting questions. You know, I'd love to hear from each of you about your perspectives within your own organizations, how the pandemic has kind of impacted the work that you're doing from a day-to-day basis. So, Carrie, I'd love to have you kick us off from an agency perspective. How has the pandemic impacted the mental health and well-being for you and your teams? Is there anything that you identify as being kind of unique challenges to being in an agency? And I'd love also if you could share maybe any things that you've helped done as a team that have been really helpful in maybe combating some of those negative things that we faced or challenges that we've talked about.
Yeah, I think 2020 kicked off as a year that we all felt quite excited about as things had calmed down early in the year. And so I think it hit to expectations and managing our own expectations that suddenly moving into Chinese New Year, this all came into being, shall we say. Now, we've all been working from home since Chinese New Year. We did, as a team in Hong Kong, go back to work for a period of time. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, but we're now back work from home. Our mainland offices are fully up and running, and of course, Singapore is work from home as well. And what we're finding, I think, mostly is the difficulty in learning a different way of communicating with each other, with our clients, with the media and the other stakeholders that we work with on a daily basis. Whereas with your colleagues, when you're used to working in an office environment, there's a lot of information that you just learn from being in the environment. You're overhearing people, you have chats around coffee, and so you feel well informed. You feel that you have a general sense of everyone's well-being. You can see it on their face. You can understand more readily if something's going on with them. It's quite difficult to be in a work from home environment where not only are we getting on with our own everyday work and working out this great work from home experiment minefield of how do we connect with our colleagues who are at home, our clients who are at home, what systems are working, what systems are not working, and so forth. But also to emotionally manage ourselves, work with our colleagues and work with our clients. We in the public relations field are in quite a unique position in that we sit in the middle of many relationships. So on a daily basis, we're managing the emotions and expectations of a client who had objectives to meet, and obviously most of the time isn't going to meet the previously set objectives because of the circumstances. And they're scared for their own jobs, they want to achieve their goals and so forth. Then on the other side, we're working with influencers and media and stakeholders and partners in an environment where every day brings another level of uncertainty. And we as a team need to digest the news and let people know very quickly. So it's that constant monitoring of bad news. I wish I could say there was some good news, but I haven't seen much recently. Digesting that, being able to analyze that and interpret that on behalf of our clients. It's then breaking bad news. And then all of this time in the background, we have colleagues who are going through some very devastating family situations. So we have colleagues that are then having to step out of work and someone's quickly going to have to take over that work, which then leads to another level of how do you organize this while you're all at a distance. Now, how do we manage that is a very good question. One, we have a town hall every week where every member of the team from every office connects, gets online, checks in. We speak about how we each are, as well as the work in progress, and of course, any new leads for any new business that there is out there. And then we also have a buddy system. So the way that Sinclair's structured, we have a mentor system rather than a boss, subordinate relationship. So everyone in the agency has a mentor that is a level above them, who isn't necessarily there for their day-to-day, have you done your work and so forth, but is there to check in and help them grow their career. But now they're in a fantastic place to be their buddy and check in on a daily, on a weekly basis and make sure every single member of the team, even if we're not coming together, is being checked in on in a face-to-face, albeit virtual environment. Another thing that I think is making a very big difference is one thing we learned was that when we're having all these calls, whether it be for a client meeting or a team meeting, turn your video on so that you can see each other's faces. And we're now making that mandatory. And I can tell you the difference that it makes in a team to be able to see each other's faces. And I say to my team, if you're in your PJs, I don't care. You know, I've put on makeup for you today, but actually in my work from home, I rarely do that anymore, right? But the face-to-face connection is everything to me. So I think that that's some tips and some ideas of what the current situation is.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. And you're right, it's such a balance of how do you build that connection, not just from a, you know, get our work done that we typically need to do context, but also that more, you know, psychosocial side of things of, you know, being together as a team and the more support side of things. So it sounds like you guys have an interesting breadth of ways you've helped bring that to life a bit more, even if we're physically disconnected right now. So Carol, I'd love to hear from your point of view. You know, you're working in-house as a communications manager at Mind. So it kind of puts you at the forefront or front line in a communication sense then of supporting the emotional health of our city and our community. So have there been any challenges that you found in your own work working in-house? And then perhaps you can also share, are there any considerations that you face given that your job is so closely tied to looking after others and the mental health of others and the pandemic itself during this time?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge that I've faced is having to balance both my own and the team's mental health while also promoting mental well-being. So one of the things that we've been doing in response to the virus is that we've been putting out resources, webinars, different presentations on how to manage mental health and well-being during this time. And those include important tips such as read the news less, check in once a day, spend less time on social media, use your energy where you feel like you can control it in a way that is positive for you. If you work in communications, and as most people do in this call, you'll know that that's actually really impossible at this time. So I spend my day at work on social media, reading the news to keep up to date and putting all my energy into helping those in mental health and responding to the virus. So I have to keep in the loop. So I think that's been the hard thing about being in communications and particularly in healthcare. And I'm sure, Erica, you know that too. You must be working on this daily. So, I mean, along with that, we're constantly on our computers, so excessive screen time. I think it's hard for many people, along with myself, to turn off when I'm at home on my computer and there isn't that much to do, and I feel the need to do more. So along with that, I think another challenge in response to this whole thing is that I have this constant desire to do more to help. So we really had to adapt to the situation and change our campaigns, change our programs, move everything online. And, you know, we've been through a lot, and Hong Kong is a resilient city. So I think we're all here and we want to support. But just knowing, like a recent research study showed that 40% of Hong Kong have some symptoms of anxiety, depression, or PTSD, and will likely need some clinical support. We want to prevent some of that. And I think it's been a priority to really work on that. And we've kind of moved everything aside to deal with it. But in terms of other considerations, I think what we need to think about is that we need to be very sensitive to the situation itself. While we're all facing the virus and we all understand and we're all in the same situation in a sense, we're all experiencing it very differently. So people have different stressors in their life, and we have to be empathetic to what they're experiencing so that we can support and react accordingly. So just an example is carers are really having a really hard time at this moment, especially for those who are ill or the elderly. Parents who have to take care of 2-3 children by Zoom school, which is something new to them, homeschool while working full-time online and adjusting to that. It's a lot of pressure. So we have to be understanding, and especially at work, be flexible with your colleagues who are facing such issues.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing. And yeah, I can definitely empathize with kind of being in the well-being and the mental health space during this time. It's really exciting and really empowering, but it is, you know, 24/7 in how we're supporting our clients and the community in this way. I think I'll also add to your point around, you know, adapting in the work that we get to do. I know you and I chatted separately around this, but it sounds like we've both also got an opportunity to step up and support maybe the internal communications of our organization as well. So while, you know, many of you on the call might be experiencing the same thing, if there's not necessarily an internal communications role within your organization, you might be having to juggle different and added responsibilities from that sense as well. So from my experience, it's been quite empowering because I've gotten to support some senior leaders and kind of crafting our message and ensuring that our employees and our teams here at Aon feel supported. But obviously, it's just being adaptable to different things. But the beauty in our skill sets is that it can be adaptable, and we've probably gotten to work on a lot of varied type of work over the last few months anyway. So I'd love to kick it over to Victor then. You've been reporting on this virus, every day since it started over the last few months. I know you told me you've been at the press conferences every single day. I'd love for you to describe a bit of what your day-to-day has looked like over the last few months since the pandemic started. And then also from a journalist and a media perspective, what are the implications on, whether it's your own mental health and well-being or that of the newsroom over the last 3 months of the pandemic? And I also love for you to touch on, are there any experiences from last year, so covering the social unrest as a journalist, that you have been able to then adapt into your ways that you've perhaps been resilient over the last few months, and any learnings from them that you've applied to now?
Right. So, Erica, I think my day-to-day life, basically right now, as I told you earlier, it would be, first of all, we'll have to go to these press conferences still, because there are daily press conferences held by the Department of Health and the Hospital Authority in Hong Kong, basically to brief the Hong Kong public about the latest cases, the infection numbers, etc. So this is one big part of my job. And apart from that, because I'm covering health and welfare and social issues in Hong Kong, and basically we just have to keep an eye on the developing situation. So if there's anything new in Hong Kong about the pandemic, for example, new testing kit, new quarantine facilities, new isolation procedures, etc., we still have to report on those daily stuff. But apart from that, obviously, we still want to dig deep into the stories and to try to come up with original ideas. So this is going to be doing, we're going to be doing that on the side. So it's not like we'll have one day off to do that, but we'll have to basically keep juggling a lot of balls. So we have to perhaps think about feature stories, to profile some doctors and nurses on the so-called dirty team dealing with the coronavirus patients, for example, and perhaps think about the wider picture, the bigger picture about Hong Kong, how Hong Kong different sectors are grappling with this. So perhaps we can talk about how underprivileged people, those who are unemployed, how are they coping with this virus, etc. Now, the way I see it about how the newsroom has changed, about what the impact of the virus has been on the newsroom and the media landscape, is basically a number of different ways. So firstly, we are being asked to work from home much more. So that presents its own challenges and opportunities, I would say. So for example, of course, there are still press conferences that you have to go to, but there are also things that are being live streamed. So it is much easier in that sense, but it is also much harder for you to perhaps talk to your colleagues and your editors on a daily basis. For example, if you have your own original ideas that you want to discuss with, to just bounce some ideas off some people to test how those ideas will work out, and perhaps to ask for some feedback and input about how to structure those stories and how to make it even more better, it will be much harder for you to do so. And of course, it will be hard for you to just interview some cases remotely, because it's hard for example, if you're talking about an issue about their own mental health, then it will be hard for you to, for example, interview a student who is on the front line, having to deal with the upcoming DSE exam, well, that is actually just starting today, to ask them to open up to you on the phone, right? Because it's very hard without that face-to-face contact and that kind of in-depth communication. And the other thing is, of course, it will be also harder for you to just try to vox pop people. Like, I mean, it'll be hard for you to just stand on the street and to perhaps try to just ask people randomly some questions about how they're doing on that day, or other things, because they're all wearing masks and they don't want to stand too close to you. So these are the difficulties that it presents. I would say in terms of how the lessons that I've learned from the social unrest and also what I've brought forward to this pandemic is, I would say, how to deal as a media person with this kind of constant feed of negative news, because reporters are human beings too, I would add, that from the social unrest, there are, of course, a daily drip of negative news about how like Hong Kong has been impacted by that, but also in the pandemic, right? You hear not just about perhaps your close colleagues and perhaps your friends, hopefully not your close ones, being affected, but also about how Hong Kong is reeling from this pandemic, really. So you just have to compartmentalize, I would say, put it in a box and just try to not read the news for some moments after you have finished your work on that day, and just to try to move on. So these are some tips that I've learned from the social unrest and I've brought forward in the current pandemic.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. And I love your point that you mentioned around kind of reporters are people too. And then maybe that leads into the next question that I had for the group. And I'm mindful of time, but I want to spend a couple of minutes on this at least around, knowing the current situation, how we're all doing. Are there ways that, PRs, communications professionals, in-house or agencies and journalists, ways that we can maybe, work better together or be more considerate of the current state of one another in our different roles during this time? And I think the point that you mentioned around, recognizing the humanity in all of us is part of that. But I'm curious, maybe Kiri, if you want to kick this off, if you have any things from your perspective, if you want to spend a few seconds speaking to that.
Yeah, I think that we all have to remember, no matter where we work or what we're doing, that every single person we're interacting with is an emotional human being, and that sometimes there is a curt email or a WhatsApp message from a client or the media or, something like that. And that oftentimes it's not, if I'm the receiver of that, it's not about me, it's about them. And rather than retaliating to something like that or taking it personally, it's good to stop and think that we don't know what's going on with other people, and that the way that someone responds has often to do with their own fear and anxieties, and that it's not often about your work or what you've been doing. And therefore, to respond after thought, not react to it, respond. And to respond in a neutral way, not to retaliate in any way to the tone of voice or sentiment that's coming through, just answer the question. And I think that I speak with my team constantly about this because, of course, emotions are very high right across the board in Hong Kong at the moment. And more than most places in the world, we're moving on to almost a year now, 11 months, right, of disruptions to our normal work lives and to our levels of stress. And really being mindful of my own emotions and what emotions I bring to any communications I have with other people, but also being mindful of what their emotions might be when they're interacting with me. And I think that that is one of the strongest things as a tool that I can use and I can help my team to use to connect better with people and to be more calm within themselves, so to speak.
Yeah, no, it's great advice, and certainly something that I personally have struggled with at points in times, and I've had conversations with my team about as well. And it's so important to kind of step back and think about that. And Victor, I was wondering if anything then from your perspective, say maybe when folks who are pitching you, is there any considerations for how you work with folks on the PR side then that you think you'd like people to maybe be mindful of or take into account, and how we can work better together during this time?
Well, I would say, just to add on to what Kiri has said, apart from just trying to perhaps understand how reporters are working at this moment, I think, well, as I've said, we are dealing with a lot more coronavirus stories right now. So I guess one way to actually work closer with reporters right now is to take care of that need. So for example, there are some stories that I can think of that I've done lately that are probably not so relevant, and perhaps reporters won't be so interested in the past, but that has become relevant again. So for example, some traditional classic health stories like telemedicine, the use of technology in the medical field, or for example, how the private sector in Hong Kong can chip in and can contribute more with the public sector, which is largely coping with this virus alone. So basically, for example, like bed shortage, manpower shortage, etc. These stories have become much more relevant again. So if you have a story to pitch to reporters, for example, if you want to talk about technology in the medical field, etc., then if you can perhaps think about things in those angles to try to come up with some good cases, and as well as some people that can talk about that would be great, because these stories have become relevant again.
And I'd just
no,
like to say thank you
that's
to
good.
Victor there for showcasing the power of PR during this time and how brands can help their agencies and their PR teams to work with media using the relevant stories, because there are so many stories, but it's not necessarily the brand story in its, you know, product or service element, so much as the emotional stories of employees or how people are pivoting and responding. So thank you, Victor.
Thank you.
And Carol, you know, I think maybe just spend a last minute, and this I think is a good last question to maybe end on. And we've talked about a lot of kind of challenges and how we're coping, but I also want to talk about kind of the positives and the opportunities from this. So are there ways that kind of our industry can have a bigger picture role in supporting the emotional and mental health of Hong Kong broader? So what's kind of our role and our impact and scale that we can have?
I think one of the silver linings of this whole situation is that people seem to be more caring or more empathetic, and they actually have been checking in more with other people. And there is a big sense of community. While it's not physical, you know, you feel it in Hong Kong. People are looking out for each other. So I think the simplest thing you can do is keep checking in on your colleagues, your partners, clients, etc., anyone you have a meeting with. And it can be simple as, for example, in our team meetings, the way we start is we ask each team member, what made you smile today? And everyone has to answer, and we all read, and it just gives something positive to the conversation. While it's not directly, how are you? It's kind of indirectly checking in with the person. So I think that's really important. But in terms of how media and the communication sector can support during this time, I think there are many different causes and vulnerable groups that do need support. Not speaking on behalf of mine, but generally, I think most nonprofits, or almost all, are really struggling at this moment. So they just did a survey of over 100 nonprofits, and 100% said that they've had a reduction in funding, and probably over 350,000 in Hong Kong are unable to have access to the services that they usually have or need. So I think communications plays a really important role and is normally really understaffed in nonprofit sector. So it'd be important, if you do have time, maybe try support or reach out or volunteer some time to help with these causes. And I think that's something that we could really do together to improve the mental well-being and health of all.
Yeah. No, thank you, Carol. And I know we could probably talk for hours about this, but I am mindful we unfortunately only have until 2 p.m. today, and we have a wonderful practice from Abby that we still need to get to. So before I introduce her, I just wanted to say thank you again, Kiri, Victor, and Carol, so much for your time today and perspective. And if we still have a few minutes at the end, we'll probably hear from you again during the Q&A. But from that, I will give a brief intro to Abby. So Abby, thank you also for joining us today. If you have not had the pleasure of working with Bridge or meeting Abby, Abby is the Managing Director of Bridge Partnership in Hong Kong. She is a certified facilitator, ontological coach, and leadership consultant. With Bridge, Abby designs and delivers transformational leadership work, looks after longstanding regional and global client partners, develops new partnerships, and supports Bridge's own community of practice. She's committed to designing and delivering programs that create the space and positive perturbance for change to occur in individual leaders, teams, organizational systems, and societies. Thank you for being here with us today, Abby, and I'll hand it over to you for a much needed hands-on well-being practice for all of us in the industry today.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you. Thanks for the intro as well. I'll try and live up to it. It was lovely to hear the conversation as well. So thank you to all the panelists. It was a lovely kind of entrance point into the topic, and how the media and communication sector kind of is in this challenging time. And I think there's so much that I would love to share with you all, but I'm extremely cognizant of time, and also kind of offering something that will be helpful for all the people that have joined this call. So what I'm going to take the time to do is focus more specifically on all of you as individual human beings. I know some of you will lead businesses, will lead teams. I know many of you are juggling multiple responsibilities. So one of the things that I think makes that quite difficult in times of stress is we can sometimes put ourselves at the bottom of the pile. And one of the frames I often come back to is, you know, when you sit on an aeroplane and they make all of the announcements at the beginning of the flight. And one of them sounds something like, in the unlikely event of an emergency, oxygen masks might come down. Please put your own oxygen mask on before you attempt to help others. I think we are in a bit of a state of emergency. And I think it is quite counterintuitive sometimes to put your own oxygen mask on first. I know I have small children. My attention often goes to them and my husband and then my team before it goes to, okay, how am I and what do I need? So I want to take 15 minutes to just give you a few practices that are a way of putting your own oxygen mask on, looking after yourself a little bit, which is so, so important. So I'm going to slow us down a little bit. And if anybody's interested or would like any more supporting material, we are always very, very helpful and happy to support. I'm going to share a few slides, but not too many, although I can't see where my slides have gone actually. But the first thing that I would really like to get everybody to do is actually put both your feet flat on the floor. Kind of notice how you're sitting. Notice if you're holding any tension in your body. Shift your bum back a little bit. And I'm going to ask everybody just to take a really deep breath. So breathe in through your nose. And let it out through your mouth. And one of the places we go to for quite a lot of support in our work is actually the military. They do a lot of research into human development, their version of well-being, peak performance. And one of the simplest things that they use that I'm offering you at the start of this session is just that, the ability to take a deep breath. So by breathing deeply, like we just did, I'm going to get you to do a couple more before the end of this session. What you do is you activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So the process, and they use something called 4x4 breathing, but the process of breathing in for a count of 4, and then breathing out for a count of 4, can actually significantly reduce your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your stress levels. So the simplest gift I can offer you, with a limited amount of time, is to remember the power of simply taking a deep breath. If you are really feeling overwhelmed and stressed, as I know all of us are, at times, not just because of COVID-19, but just generally the pace of life, the pace of change, the do more with less culture, the 24/7 media environment that we're in is challenging. And if you are feeling that flood of either emotional or rational kind of overload, put your feet on the floor and take a deep breath. If you've got a bit longer, do it for a minute. And it's amazing the impact that it can have. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share a few things with you. I'm really happy if you want to put any questions into the chat box. I'll come to them as much as I can. Is that working, Erica? Can you see those slides? Yeah.
Yep,
Okay.
yep, can see your slides.
Super. There we go. So having taken a few deep breaths together, the next thing I want to introduce everybody to is the concept of vitality. So at Bridge, we do quite a lot of work around holistic well-being. We do it through the lens of corporates, but in my opinion, corporate systems are just a collection of individual human beings. So a lot of this translates across all industries, but also into your homes, into your family systems. And although every human being is unique, every human being has quite similar holistic needs. So when we think about vitality, we're thinking about what are the things that need to be in place for you to have your own oxygen mask on, for you to be looking after your own total well-being. So we look to create an awareness across 4 different quadrants when we talk about well-being. So many of you will be very familiar with the benefit of having a physical practice. So looking after your physical health through whatever kind of sport you enjoy, regular movement, your 10,000 steps, yoga, football, whatever it is. You know, our sense is that people are more aware of this quadrant than most because of the recent kind of focus over the last kind of 10, 15 years on the benefit of getting active. But we also look at what's needed for your mental well-being, and we call it mental clarity, and we aren't mental health practitioners, so it feels very important to kind of delineate the work that we do and where we hand off to, you know, mental health practitioners. But I really liked your scale, Erica, which is sort of, there's a continuum here that many of us are oscillating on. And I'm going to give you a little bit more insight into that quadrant and what can be helpful. We also look at our emotional balance when we're looking at well-being. So how is my emotional range? How aware am I about how am I feeling? What kind of outlets do I have for my emotions? And how can I kind of have a bit of a regulation practice for my emotions? And finally, we talk about your spiritual lift. And this is not just your religious practice. When we talk about your spiritual practice, we're talking about what are the things that really bring you joy? What are the things that really bring you peace? And they look very different for different human beings. But what we believe is really important is to have a connection to meaning, a connection to joy, a connection to inner peace, and really be in an exploration of what that is for you. You know, my version of it is kind of yoga and being out in nature. It takes different forms for different people. And one of the things that we have sent you, Kiri's going to help me with a poll. It's anonymous, there's no judgment, but we did send you a well-being assessment, which is a great way of taking a snapshot about how you are doing. So take a sec for me and just give us a sense of how many people have had the chance to complete the well-being assessment. What I would encourage you to do if you haven't had the chance to do it is have a look at it in your inbox and take a few minutes to do it, because it's very helpful every now and again to just hit pause and ask yourself that question, how am I? This very quick to fill in assessment gives you a little bit more detail around that, how am I? And in which of these quadrants might I be doing okay? Might I have a bit better practice at making time for myself? And where might I be really under indexed? And what might I helpfully do to shift that? So what we have done is shared the 24 questions with you. I'm going to pop them up on the screen. But my suggestion is, with the time that we've got, not to hold too much space for these questions to be answered live. So if you've done it, brilliant. If you haven't, this is what it looks like. You've got 4 different columns to fill in. The key thing here to remember is if the statement, I get less sleep than I need and I wake up feeling tired, is often true for you, it is for me, then you'd put a 2. Sometimes true for you, you'd give it a 1. Not true for me, you'd give it a 0. So what we're really looking for here is when these numbers are getting higher, you know, if these numbers are kind of 8, 10, 12, then it's a watch out. It's not, hey, this is bad. It's just, oh, right, okay, that's something I might need to put a bit of attention on. If these numbers are coming out kind of 0, 2, 4, good for you. And this might be an area in your life where you've kind of got a little bit more of a practice, you're a bit more cognizant, you're looking after yourself a little bit better. And if we were in one of our virtual workshops, what we would then do is get the participants to kind of share how they're doing. You'll notice the larger numbers are here in the middle, the smaller numbers are at the edge so that there's a visual cognizance. But if you have time, draw one of these grids for yourself so that when you have done your well-being assessment, you can see how you're doing and just have that, oh, right, probably need to make a little bit more time for 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these. But what I wanted to share with you all so that everybody's got some sort of practical tips and tricks from this session is these 4 sets of suggestions. So when you're looking at your scores, if you're thinking, wow, I've got a pretty high score on physical, I need to look after my physical well-being a bit better. Here is some of just the many, many things that you could look at building into your life a bit more. Sleep, you'll see, is top of all 4 columns, but a sport, individual, just a bit of stretching, you know, managing your caffeine, your alcohol intake. One of the correlations for me at the moment is stress levels and a glass of wine. That's not always helpful. Sometimes it would be better to make a different choice. But we will send you this grid. My encouragement or my offer to you is have a look at it and see what's maybe 1 or 2 things that you could start to be pulling in to your daily or weekly practice to support your own well-being. The other thing, and I really loved it, it was referenced by Kiri and by Carol and by Victor, is that there is something extremely helpful at the moment about replacing I with we. So I know Kiri talked about the check-ins with her team. Carol talked about, sharing something that made you smile. Victor, you talked about, we're all human beings. I think it's really, really helpful at the moment to remember that in your search for well-being, the more you can turn that into an inquiry about how others are, a willingness to support others, actually, the more helpful it is for your own well-being. So there's quite a lot of research about one of the best things to do for yourself is to help another. And because I'm sort of closing a little bit of an input session, I'm going to actually invite everybody to just take another deep breath with me. So as we look at this kind of very simple, beautiful slide, just take another deep breath. And just notice, even in that micro moment, the shift in your physiology that's available to you. The other thing I'm going to offer you as a bit of a practice to support your well-being is a very, very old art form, which is journaling. I don't know how many of you already have a journaling practice. I used to have a diary when I was much younger, and it wasn't until the last few years when I started exploring well-being in much more depth that I've come back to this practice. But journaling is also scientifically proven to reduce stress levels. It's used in a lot of mental health practitioners' toolkits, but we also use it in our leadership development work to give people the space to reflect on how am I, what's going on for me, what am I learning, what am I wondering about, what am I noticing? And it can take some of the heat out of situations. So as Kiri talked about, when you get those emails and you're tempted to bash out the response, that's kind of what I think draft boxes are for generally. But, sometimes hitting pause and doing a little bit of, hey, what's going on for me, and getting it out can really helpfully bring down that amygdala hijack, bring down that kind of fight, flight, freeze response, and be a bit more like, oh, okay, I see. So what I am going to offer you all is 4 questions that might be helpful as you've looked at that well-being survey and as you continue to look at your overall well-being. These are also very helpful for all of you that manage teams or have younger children who are all in, a version of the overwhelm that many of us are experiencing at the moment. So the first thing to do is grab a pen and paper, when you have a few minutes, and just inquire, what am I noticing? When I look at how I am right now, what comes up for me? What am I noticing? And our encouragement is to free write. Some of you might have grabbed a pen and paper right now if you've done your assessments. Some of you might want to do this afterwards in a quiet space. Just don't judge it. Don't censor it. Just free flow write. What do I notice? You can do that about any topic. What am I noticing today about me, about life, about the media, about my job? The second thing that can be very, very helpful to frame up what you might want to focus on is, how would I like this to be different? How would I like my overall well-being to be different? And that might sound simple, but very often people don't take the time to think about how would I like to be? Therefore, negating the sense of choice about your state. We all have a choice about how we are. It sometimes doesn't feel like it. Sometimes feel we're totally had by the situation. We're totally caught up in our obligations, our stress, our deadlines. There is always a choice. So how might I like this to be different can be a really, really helpful question to unlock the possibilities. Other thing that's very, very helpful to connect to is, what are my biggest obstacles? Sometimes we need to surface some of our unconscious obstacles, some of the assumptions we're making about what I have to do, what I must do, what I should do. Anything that starts with should do, must do, have to do is a bit of a clue for me. So really, really interesting to just look at, well, what is standing in my way? And then ask yourself, and what's really standing in my way? You know, as opposed to what are my assumed obstacles or things I've just never tried to do differently. So writing all that out can be very liberating. And then what are one or two things that you can commit to for yourself to put your own oxygen mask on, to look after yourself a bit better, to lower your scores in one of those 4 vitality quadrants? And that's where that list of suggestions can sometimes be a helpful starting point. Pick one. You don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to do everything all at once. You know, doing simple things that you can do regularly is a much better way of developing new well-being healthy habits than suddenly trying to run a marathon, take up hot yoga, go vegan, and drink 4 liters of water a day. It's kind of like too much. You try and stop drinking kind of coffee or wine in the mix as well, you know, and you're really putting yourself under too much pressure. So simple things that you can do. And the only other thing, I'm going to hand back to you, Erica, in a couple of minutes. I mean, this is a concept for you, right? So what I have just done here, ignore the left-hand column, because what we do with a lot of people is productivity mapping. So we help people map their energy. When's your energy highest and lowest, and map your day to it. But what I wanted to offer everybody is the concept of designing your day. Because I think some of us are had by our day. Some of us are running a million miles an hour, and at the moment, a lot of that is screen time based. And that's not great for our well-being. So what I wanted to offer you is the opportunity to think about, how can I design a day that allows me to have my own oxygen mask on? How can I design a day that has my well-being as well as my productivity in mind? How can I design a day that allows me to be all the different things I am? Partner, wife, you know, mum, carer, friend. Build in the time for the things that you are and the things that you want to be. Think about your well-being. And also think about, one of the great things I think about this time is it's throwing up in the air our assumptions about what it means to work, when we have to do what we think of as work. There is a bit of a gift in this time to say, okay, if I was going to do it differently, what would suit me more? So it's just a concept that I offer you as we end the session to have a think about. So from me, there's just a real encouragement to put yourself first. Take a breath. Think about what you need to be the healthiest, happiest version of yourself. So thank you for listening to me. I hope it was in some way helpful and people have taken one or two things from it. And Erica, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Abby. And, you know, I can even though I can't see everyone's faces who is attending right now, I can sense the environment shift, and not just myself, and probably what you've brought to all of us. So very much appreciate your time and practice. And I think what is so great about the tools that you've just provided to everyone is that it's flexible, in that, you know, you're not telling people to do X, Y, Z, take up hot yoga, et cetera, like you mentioned. It's more about, how do you have an understanding of what's best for you, and then how can you use these tools over time to then reflect on that and adapt what you might need one week compared to the next. So thank you for sharing that. And for everyone on the
My
call,
pleasure.
we'll definitely recirculate all these materials again afterwards, so you can have them, both the assessment and also the questions for reference as well. I'm mindful of time, but I think we have one question that would be good. If Abby, I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer. We had a question around what are some other practical tips around helping colleagues and employees with their well-being on a day-to-day basis while working remotely. So I think we discussed it a lot on the panel, but I wanted to see if there's anything else that you would add from your perspective before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes up for me most strongly, I mean, there is a range of things, but I think developing a strong empathy practice. So I think interaction is not the same as connection. It's one of our kind of guiding insights in our work. So just because I'm on a call with you doesn't mean I'm connecting with you, doesn't mean I feel seen and heard. So I think in the absence of the water cooler moments, the going to get a coffee together moments, the getting in the lift together moments, we need to index up the amount of time and attention we take to check in with people. How are you? How are you doing? And really listen. Don't just listen to the words they say. And if there's a lack of congruence, like, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm really happy. How are you really? I've got a few minutes. Let's have a chat if it would be helpful. So indexing up on connection would be the one piece of advice I'd offer with a minute left on the call.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I know that's something that you all at Bridge practice internally. I've heard a lot about kind of your weekly stand-ups, or not weekly, sorry, daily stand-ups that you have.
Yeah.
But then you are also hosting weekly check-ins with anyone who wants to join. So if anyone wants to just have an added level of checking in, maybe I'll just go ahead and plug that for you guys. But Bridge organizes, Bridge organizes that on a weekly basis.
Nice one, Erica.
An easy way to check in, maybe outside of the ways that you normally do so. So again, I'm mindful of time, and I'm sure that we could continue to talk for multiple hours about this. But before we end things today, I just wanted to at least share a parting slide with not only our contact information, but also some resources. Are you guys able to see this okay? Sure. Okay, great. So if you would want to continue this conversation, we'd love to hear from you. We've included some of our email addresses on this slide. We also have the PRHK Gmail if you want to reach out there. But also if you feel like you need someone to talk to in a more professional setting or might want some further support, Mind has a really great list of 80 plus free or low cost local resources for Hong Kong. And I've also included some hotlines in Cantonese or multilingual ones from Samaritans, if you feel like you want to reach out there. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you are leaving this hour maybe feeling a little bit better than you did coming into it. I certainly am. It's amazing how much 4 seconds of taking a breath can even do that. But we hope that you found this conversation valuable. And again, please, reflect on what you've learned. We hope that you can apply some of these learnings to your day-to-day life, share with others, share on social media. And thank you once again, Victor, Carol, Abby, and Kiri for your time today. It's been so great sharing this virtual space with you, and looking forward to all that is good to come from this for our industry and everyone who's joined today.
Thank you.
So, thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Erica.
Thanks.